Hi everyone, this is Matt with Dotloop. I'm one of the success managers here at Dotloop, and I'll be the one hosting the webinar today. We'll be getting started here in a couple minutes. Just want to give everyone a chance to get into the webinar. But at this point, you should be able to hear me. You should be able to see my screen. You can see Dotloop Premium up here in the top left. And if you have any questions while we're going through the webinar today, there's a questions panel along the right side. You'll see there's a chat section or questions where you could type me a question. I'll read it aloud and answer it to the best of my knowledge. And again, we'll get started here in a second. Again, my name is Matt. I've been here at Dotloop for about 3 or 4 years now. And the reason I originally came on board with Dotloop is I wanted to do something that I knew was going to have an impact on people's lives. And I've seen that in a lot of different ways over the past couple of years, especially when working with clients that are out of town, or a lot of different examples have come up. But one that I thought was probably the most impactful on me was there was an agent that was working with a client that was actually pregnant. So they were getting close to meeting a deadline, needed to accept an offer, and the client went into labor and was actually in the hospital right when they had to meet that deadline. So what they did is they ended up signing the documents through Dotloop while she was in the hospital going into labor, and she was able to meet the deadline and basically buy a house. You would never do that working with a set of paper documents, and I think it's just an interesting story that really shows the power of what you can accomplish through Dotloop and doing everything electronically. So just a quick story. Figured I'd give you a little bit of background about me and why I enjoy working here at Dotloop. But I'm going to go ahead and get started with the training. Again, you should be able to see my screen at this point, see and hear me. And at this point, you should all be looking at my home screen, which is where you'll see all of my loops listed out here. Each of these are a different transaction that I put into the system. And right now I'm in what's called the list view. This is where I've got all of my loops listed out. As you can see, I've got the transaction type here, the address, the status, where it is in the review process. And as I get further into this, once I receive an offer, if I'm working on the purchase side, I've also got the purchase price and the closing date. So you can see there's just a lot of information available in the list view. So if you don't have this type of view, or if you're somewhat new to Dotloop and just haven't ever changed your view, you can toggle back and forth between those up here in the top and right corner. This is where I can switch to grid view. And we have two different views, grid and list view. So the grid view is basically the visual view. This is where you can add a picture in the background here, and this is in a gridded format, so it gives you a more visual appeal here. But I can toggle back and forth between the list and the grid view. And again, the list view is what I prefer. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and start a new loop here. But before I start a new loop, I just want to give you kind of a broad overview of what a loop is. So when you think of a loop, think of it like an online conference room where everybody that's involved with the transaction can be invited to this conference room. So in this case, I'm acting as the buying agent. I could invite my buyers. The listing agent can be invited in here, as well as anybody else that needs to be involved, like the different service providers and whatnot. And so what I'm able to do is I've got my filing cabinet sitting right next to me. I'm able to pull a document out, fill it out right in front of me, and in this case I need to get the contract signed by my buyer. So I'd fill it out, pass it over to my buyer, and even though I have all these different people in the room with me, one of the important aspects of Dotloop is that even though these people are all in here with me, when I pull that contract out and start filling it out, they can't see anything that I'm doing with it. So nobody can see this document until I decide to give them access, and that's when I can decide on the type of access I'm going to give them. So when I pass this over to my buyer, I have the ability to give him the ability just to sign the documents. If he needs to fill things out, I could give him the ability to fill it out. Or if he just needs to view a copy, I can just give him the view only ability. So I have complete control over who can see what's going on in here, as well as what they're able to do with what they're seeing. So with those type of permissions, I'm able to fill out the documents, pass it to all the different parties that are involved, get the documents filled out and signed, and then ultimately submit to my office for review once everything's completed. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start a new loop. So again, I'm acting as the buying agent, so I'm going to create a loop here, and I'm going to title this loop. Typically, you're going to title the loop using the property address. In this case, I'm going to be submitting an offer on a property for 3832 Germania. And you can see that as I'm typing in the address, it has a couple different sources that I can search through. So you can see that the first source that shows up here is through Google Maps. This is basically searching through Google Maps to find the correct address, and selecting this source will give you a couple of different functions. One, it'll make it to where when you click on this, it'll autofill that address into the name of the loop. But two, it'll autofill that into the documents for you. So if you don't have somebody else that's listed the property already, use the Google Maps source. It'll help autofill the information and make sure you have the correct naming convention for the property address. But in this case, I can see that the property I'm submitting my offer onto is already listed by Meg here. So what I'm able to do is if I click on her listing, it's then going to link or give me the option to link with her listing, and that will do a couple of things. One, it'll again autofill the address into the documents for me, but it'll also pull some of the listing information over. So the listing agent's contact information will autofill, and you'll see that there's some other details that pull over from the listing agent's loop. But don't worry, there's nothing sensitive. It's essentially the same type of information that would typically come off of the MLS. So I'll go ahead and click on her loop here. It asks me if I would like to link. I say yes. And now I'm going to go ahead and create my loop that is going to be linked with Meg's listing. So now from here, you'll see there's a couple things that are already set up. First off, Meg's already in my loop as the listing agent. I could then come in here as the buying agent and set my role. So I'll set my role here as the buying agent. And then I'm going to select the transaction type and status that I'm going to work with. So I just want to refresh a couple things real quick. Select the transaction type here as a purchase. And then I'm going to select the status of the loop. So now these statuses are essentially a way for you to organize the loop based on where you are in the process. Right now I would be in the pre-offer stage where I haven't submitted my offer over to the listing yet, and I'm still filling out my documentation. Once my offer is accepted, I would then go under contract. Once everything is closed out, I'd mark this as sold. And if this is a test loop or this is something that falls through, basically something I just don't want to see on my homepage anymore, that's when I'm going to use this archived option, because that'll hide it from view on the homepage. And the important thing to note about this is it's impossible to delete a loop once it's been created. And that's for your protection, so you never lose any of the data that you're putting in here, and you'll always have access to the files that you need to have saved. But archiving it is a way to keep all of this organized so that it's not showing up on your homepage. It's hidden from view, essentially. But again, in this case, I'm in the pre-offer phase. And that's the first pieces that I need to set up. The transaction type, status, I've already got the loop name. I'm in here as the buying agent. So now I'm ready to add my client in so that we can get him ready to fill out, or so I can fill out and then he can sign the documents. So I'm going to go ahead and add my buyer in. And you'll see that there's 3 pieces of information that are required for anyone that's going to sign electronically in .loop. And that's their first and last name, their email address, which I've added Bob to a previous loop before, so it saved his email. Otherwise, I can just type it in. But when I click here, it'll paste that into place. And then I need to select his role. In this case, he is the buyer. So you can see, once I select the role, it now asks for all of this additional information. As you can see, it's optional, so I don't have to fill this in, but you want to because this is going to help when filling out the documents. Basically, everything that you type in here has the ability to autofill into your documents if the documents require this information. So I'm just going to make this up just to use as an example, but we'll add Bob with all of his contact information. So now once I have all of this filled out, I would then be ready to add Bob into my loop. Now there's a couple of other pieces that I want to point out here and go into a little bit more detail on. So for example, the role that I've got here, this is really important because this is what tells the documents where this person's information needs to go, as well as where they're going to need to sign. Because on the documents, there's pre-designated spots where the buyer needs to sign here. I've got Bob set up as the buyer, so Bob will need to sign on that spot of the document. I also want to point out that you have to have a unique email for each person that's going to sign electronically in .loop, meaning that if I was working with a husband and wife, they would not be able to share the same email to sign. And that's for security reasons because we use the email address to accurately identify who's signing. and it's involved with the verification. So you do have to have an email for each person that's signing. And then I also want to point out this team function here. So first off, you never want to add a client to your team. Adding someone to your team essentially gives that person full access into this file. So they'd be able to modify any of the documents, they'd see all of the inter-office communication. So you never want to add a client to your team, and you wouldn't ever add the agent on the other side of the deal either. You don't want them to have full access into this file either. But you might add maybe an assistant or a transaction coordinator, or if you're truly on a team with another agent, you could add each other to the team. That way, you're both on the same side of the deal, you both have full access to everything. So that's really the only situation you would use this, is if you're both on the same side, you're both comfortable having full access. And the last thing to note about this is that you cannot remove someone once they've been added to your team. So you only want to use this if you're comfortable with them having full access, essentially forever. So I've got all the information I need for my buyer here. I'm going to go ahead and add him into the loop. And now you can see I've got my buyer in the loop with us. Now I could add a second person. Today I'm just going to work with Bob just to keep this simple, but I could add Bob's wife, add both of them in here. It's just a matter of going to add person again and adding their contact information. So I have everything set up in this loop. I have the different people I need to work with and some of the pieces of information about the transaction and where I am in the process. So now I'm ready to start adding documents into my loop. So there's a couple different ways that you can add a document. We're going to be mostly covering the first two, adding from your computer and adding from your templates. I'll go into brief detail about email, but I won't actually be adding a document from my email. So now the first option is adding a document from your templates. So these are the interactive documents that I'm able to fill out on Dotloop, get signed electronically. So I can go to my templates here, and I've got these different packages set up by my brokerage. So you can see that these are all organized differently depending on the states that I'm in or the type of packages I need. So this is going to be different for pretty much anybody that's using Dotloop. Your brokerage is the one that determines how these packages are set up. But in this case, I'm working on a purchase in Ohio. So I'll go to this package, and right now I just need the contract. You can see I could grab multiple documents here, checking them off. But just to keep things simple, I'm going to work with the contract today, and I'll go ahead and copy this into my loop. So now that's the template section. Those are the interactive documents or the interactive library that your brokerage has made available to you. And what's available in there will vary depending on the state that you're in, the different forms that you need, and how they need to be organized. But now the other option that I'm going to walk through is adding from your computer. This is just like uploading a PDF and attaching it to an email. You go select from your computer, and now I've got a property disclosure saved somewhere in here. There we go. So as you can see, I'm just finding a PDF on my computer, selecting it, and then I can open it up in the loop. So that's a way to add a PDF, and PDF files are the only type of files you can upload into Dotloop. And I wanted to show you the two different types here because this again is going to be fully interactive, whereas this will be a flat PDF, meaning that it will not have any of the interactive fields laid out, but I have the ability to drag and drop those into place, which is what I'm going to walk through here in a second. So now the third option here, which again, I won't actually add a document using this process, but I'll explain how it works. This is adding via email. So let's say, for example, that I received that property disclosure from Meg, the listing agent. She sent me the property disclosure via email. It's attached. I could then take that email I received from her and forward it into this loop. So what I would do is pull up that email, click forward, and the address I'm forwarding it to is automatically copied once you click email. So if I click email here, let me refresh. I went through a couple of different activities there. So now that I've refreshed, once I click email, it'll automatically copy this long email address here. So this email address is tied specifically to this folder. Again, I would forward the email that I received from the listing agent with the PDF attached, forward it to this address. All I have to do is right click and paste it, and then it'll forward that document directly into this folder for me. So that's how you can use the email function. It's especially useful if you're mobile because you can't typically save a PDF onto your phone. You're able to forward the email you received directly into the loop and then work on it from there. So that's how to add documents into the system. So now I want to pause for a second. I want to ask you guys all a quick question. And this is around the way that you typically work with your clients. So I just want to get your feedback on how you guys typically work within Dotloop or work with your clients. But do you guys ever create your own custom documents to use when you're working with your clients, either in Dotloop or another system? I know you can do this in Adobe or possibly some of the other systems out there. But I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll and let me know what you think. So do you guys create your own custom documents to work with your clients? And also, in the meantime, if you guys have any questions, anything that I've gone over so far, feel free to type them in the questions panel. And I'll wait until we have about 70, 80% of the people have responded. Mainly just want to see what your thoughts are on this poll. All right, we'll wait a couple more seconds. We've got about 60%, so maybe one or two more people will answer, and we'll go ahead and see what the results look like. Alrighty, let's take a look at the results here. So it looks like about 80% of you do use a custom document with your client, so meaning that you basically make it fillable yourself. Maybe you're using the interactive forms already, and you're getting those filled out and signed by your clients. Some of you are not currently. So what I'll show you today is basically how to take a form, customize it, so you are able to work with your clients depending on the situation. But thanks everyone for your feedback. And again, if you have any other questions while I'm going through this process, feel free to type them in the questions panel, and I'll be happy to read them aloud and answer them to the best of my knowledge. So now at this point, I have two documents in here. I have the property disclosure and I have this contract. I can reorganize this if I need to. I can put the contract on top here. And you'll also notice that I have these drop-down menus along the right side. So I'll point those out, or I'll get to those here in a second. First thing I want to point out, though, is once I click on the checkboxes here and select the documents, I get a lot of different options across the top here. So I could archive these documents. Again, that's a way to hide this from view. You can't delete a document from a loop, but you can archive it. I could copy these into a different folder, into a different loop. I'm going to open them here in a second. Print, download, or fax these are other options. So the only difference between these options and the drop-down menus is that these options apply to everything I have checked off, whereas these drop-down menus will apply just to the document it's next to. You'll notice there's a couple of extra options here. I'm going to be coming back to the history once we've gone through some of the changes. But I wanted to point those out because those drop-down menus are all over the website. They're basically your options or your toolbox for whatever they're next to. So like in this case, I could go to the drop-down next to the folder, rename this folder, call this offer on 3832 Germania. So there's a lot of different tools available within those drop-down menus. So if you're ever looking for how to do something within Dotloop and you can't find it, keep an eye out for that drop-down menu because it'll typically have what you need. So I'm ready to open this up. I'll go ahead and open both of these documents. And you'll see that once I open up in an interactive form, I'm going to get this autofill pop-up. This is basically a cover sheet for my documents. Everything that I fill in here has the ability to autofill onto the documents. In this case, just the contract, since that's the only interactive document that I've worked with. So this first section here is confirming that I have my roles assigned correctly. So Bob needs to be my buyer. I'm in here as the buying agent. Meg is our listing agent. And in this case, I set everything up correctly in the beginning, so I'm all set to go here. But if I forgot someone, I could add them here by selecting a person, adding them in. Or if I added Bob and didn't assign his role, or if I didn't assign my role, you can always adjust that from here. So this is basically confirming you just have everything set up correctly with your people, and they have the correct roles. And then in this case, everything's good to go. So I'm going to move to the next sections. So now you can see my buyer's information has autofilled. This is from when I added him to the loop and added all of that contact information. Property address is also autofilled. My information is autofilled. And now I'm just going to go through and pretty much fill in anything that didn't automatically fill in for me. So again, obviously I'm just making this up, but this is where you type in the purchase price, the earnest money amount, and we'll say this is held by escrow. So again, everything you fill in here is going to find a spot on this contract and save you some time, especially if you're working with multiple documents, because it takes this one piece of information and puts it into all the documents that require it. You can see the listing agent's information has pulled over from her loop, and then I'm just going to fill out these last couple pieces of information. just to finalize everything. Alrighty, so now we have everything in this cover sheet filled out. We can double check it if we need to, but in this case, I'm going to go ahead and click autofill. And you'll see that wherever this information has filled in, it's automatically going to be highlighted in yellow. And you see that pretty much the first half of the first page is completely filled in for me. And this is all live and fillable, meaning that I can still make changes to this if I need to. So if I made a typo here, I could come in and change this to 260,000. That's just going to change it on this document. If I had multiple documents that had this purchase price, I could go back to autofill and change it on all the documents, but I can make adjustments as I go depending on what I need to make changes to. And you can see that we have these blue fields all over the place. These are essentially the live interactive fields to where you're able to go through, check off whatever you need to, type in any of these text boxes. Everything on here is fillable, so you can fill out everything you need to get the contract ready to go. And then you can also see that towards the bottom here, my buyer's initials have automatically been assigned. So this is tying it back to that role. I gave Bob the role of buyer. The buyer needs to sign here, so now this field is assigned to Bob. So if you think of this like a hard copy or a paper copy of a document, you're typically going to go through, circle where the client needs to sign, or cross out where they don't need to sign. In this case, we've already taken care of circling the areas they would typically need to sign, but you can unassign these if you need to, or essentially cross them out. So I know this isn't a good example. We wouldn't typically cross this out. Your buyer is always going to need to sign here. But just for example, if I wanted to, I could come to this field, click on it, and reassign it so that it's assigned to no one. Assigning it to no one is essentially crossing this off the document. They don't need to sign here, and it's not going to prompt them to sign here, which is also why it says no one over here. We don't have any sellers in here, so we don't need anyone to sign yet. So that's how you can adjust the signatures and the initials. And at this point, I'm just going to assume I've filled everything out on this contract. From there, it's pretty much just rinse and repeat. You check off what you need to, fill out any of the text boxes, make sure the signature fields and initials are assigned correctly. And in this case, everything is ready to go. So we'll just assume I've filled everything out on here just for time's sake. And I want to get down to that seller's disclosure so I can walk through what it looks like to work with a non-interactive field. You can also see that as I get closer to the bottom, there's a lot of other information that's auto-filled, just showing you how helpful it is to get that all taken care of in the very beginning. So now, in this case, I'm at the property disclosure, and I can see, okay, I've got the seller's signature on here, but I don't have initial fields where my buyer would need to sign. This is just a flat PDF. It's filled out, but I don't have the interactive fields I need. So that's where we can add all of these additional fields up top. In this scenario, I'm just going to need initials and a signature down at the bottom. But you could potentially add text fields, date fields, name fields, checkboxes, radio buttons, strike-throughs. Pretty much anything you would need to make this document live and interactive is available here. And it's really just a matter of dragging it into place, typing on it, or in this case, I'm going to grab an initial, drag that into place, and then I can resize this using the bottom right-hand corner. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is you'll see that when I first add this initial, it's assigned to anyone, meaning that I could sign this, anybody I send this to could sign here. And in this case, that's not really that big a deal. I'm just working with one buyer. It's the only person I'm going to be sending it to right now. So it's okay for me to just keep it to anyone because he's the only one that needs to sign. But if I'm working with more than one buyer, or if I'm planning on sending this to other parties, then I'm going to want to assign this directly to the person that needs to sign there. So with two buyers, I'd assign one to Bob and the second one to his wife, or work with this however you need to. But you're going to typically want to get into the habit of assigning these fields just to make sure it's just going to be signable by that person. So now I've taken care of this initial field. If I had a wife here, I could add a second initial field, assign it to them. But now I've got 5 or 6 more pages that I need to get initialed. So what I can do is click on this field, and you'll notice that when it's selected, I have these hotkeys down here in the bottom right. So the one I'm going to use is the ability to copy this. And that way I don't have to go to every page, drag it into place, reassign it to the buyer. I can just copy this and paste it on each page. So in this case, I'm using a Mac. So I'm going to use the Command-Shift-C. If you're using a PC, that's just going to be Control-Shift-C, and it'll show the correct keystroke here, depending on the computer you're using. Once I copy it, you can see it now shows I have the ability to paste the field. And now I just need to go to each page, paste it, drag it into place, and it's much faster than dragging this into the correct spot, resizing it, and assigning it to the correct person. You're just clicking where it needs to go. So now I get to the bottom. I needed an actual signature now. So I'll grab a signature field instead of initials, go through that same process. I just like to make it look good and fill up the whole spot. And then I'm going to assign this to Bob. So that is essentially the process to make this document interactive. This is just when signing this disclosure, since I'm not going to be making changes. If, for example, this was something else that you're making a change to, you could always come in here, add a text box, make a change here, and then add initials next to it. So you have the ability to modify this however you need to. Obviously, you're not going to be modifying a seller's disclosure. Only the seller could do that. But there are other documents where this might be the case, and you can work with this however you need to. But in this case, I don't need those. I just need initials on this document. So now I've got everything set up with these documents. I've got the seller's disclosure ready for my client to sign. I've filled out the contract. That's all ready to go and ready for Bob to sign. So now I'm going to save all my changes and get ready to share this. So I'll just click Save and Share. If I wanted to save, I could just save it and come back to it later. But now this is where I'm deciding on how I want to share this with my client, what permission I want to give them. So now before I do that, I want to come up with another poll. Again, just want to get your feedback on some different aspects of the system. So this time the question is, how do you guys typically send your purchase paperwork today? Do you guys send it via fax typically, via email, snail mail, or maybe you guys have trained some carrier pigeons or a hawk to do your delivery for you? But if you send something through Dotloop, consider that sending it via email. So let me know what you think. I'm assuming probably most of you send via email nowadays, but who knows, maybe we've got some pigeon trainers out there. Let me know what you guys think. Awesome. Looks like we have just about 80% here, so we'll go ahead and show the results. So now based on this poll, looks like we've got 100% email. Not surprising, that's typically the results. Just so you know, there is actually the ability to fax out of Dotloop. I pointed out a little bit earlier, but you are able to fax. Fortunately, we cannot mail or send out a carrier pigeon for you, but email is the typical response for this. So appreciate your response, and we'll go ahead and talk through how we can email documents out of Dotloop as well. So now, again, if you have any questions, make sure to type in the questions panel. What we're about to do is share the document with Bob. Just to give a quick recap, what we've gone through so far is how to create a loop in Dotloop from the buying agent's perspective, how to add your clients, how to add the documents. We just filled out the documents, got them ready to go, and now we're getting ready to share this with Bob so he's able to sign these documents. So now when you're sharing a document with a client, if you tie this back to the conference room example I gave you in the very beginning, this is where we're sitting across from Bob and we're deciding on, one, who do we want to give access to the documents, and two, what type of permissions should they have with the documents. So Bob's the person we're giving access. Myself, Brad, and my brokerage are the ones that have access right now, and then I'm going to decide on the permission that I want to give him. There's 4 different permission types available. Can sign is the default and probably what you'll be using the majority of the time. It's typically just going to let the client sign where the fields are assigned to them. You can also see that we have the ability to give them the fill and sign permission. That's going to take them to every text box on the document, every checkbox, and prompt them to fill it in. And that's typically what you would use if you're sending a document to your client that has to be filled out by them. So like that seller's disclosure, you might want to send a seller's disclosure to your seller with the can fill and sign permission so they can fill out and sign the document. But the important thing to note about both of these options, can sign and can fill and sign, is that once your client finishes signing or filling out the document, they're going to click a button to save their changes, and it's automatically going to share it back with you as the agent. So your client does not have to create an account. They don't have to do anything other than finish the document, save it, and then you'll get an update. But that's different than the last option here, can edit in private. This is typically what you would use if you're sending it to another agent in Dotloop. And can edit in private is essentially going to give that person the same type of access that you have with the document. So they have full editing capabilities. They can modify the signatures of the initial field so that it's assigned to their client. And the private aspect means that you're not going to see the changes they make until they share it back with you. So basically, when I'm ready to send this to Meg to submit my offer over to her, I'm going to send it with can edit in private so that one, Meg can go through, make any adjustments she needs to the initial field so that her seller can sign. And then ultimately, she's going to share it back with me once she's done filling out or signing the documents. And because of that, you want to make sure that you're typically just going to use this permission with someone else that's at least familiar enough with Dotloop or with this type of technology to know how to share the document back with you, because you won't see their changes until they share it back. So now, if you're not comfortable sending it to the other agent with can edit in private, you don't want them to be able to make changes, or you don't think that they'll be very comfortable with this system, then you can give them the view only capability, which in this case, I wouldn't want to do view only since I have 12 fields assigned. But view only would just let them view the document, and you're also going to want to attach the PDF to the email. That way they can just download the PDF attachment and work with it from there. And that's actually a feature I recommend using pretty much all the time, because this is going to give your client or whoever you're sending it to both options. They can either view the PDF attachment, download and print it off if that's what they prefer, or they can use the link to look at the document in Dotloop and sign it or do whatever they need to depending on the permission you're giving them. So in this case, I have the PDF attached. Bob is who I'm giving access to the documents, and I'm giving him the can sign permission. So I'm going to go ahead and share these both with Bob. You'll see that he moves up into the people that have access. So I'm done here. And I'm going to go back to the loop to wait on his signature. And you can see that I'm now waiting on others, and we're waiting on Bob to sign. So 1 second, now I'm going to go ahead and pull up Bob's email so I can show you what this looks like when Bob goes through and signs these documents. But again, let me know if you have any questions throughout this process. I'd be happy to cycle back through anything I've covered as well as answer any more detailed questions. So now let me switch over to Bob's email. You can see that he's got an email coming from me. Obviously, you wouldn't normally be able to have access to your client's email. This is just to show you what it would look like from the buyer's perspective. So now when Bob opens this email, you're going to see that he gets this default message. Would you review, complete, and sign these documents? He has a link to view the documents here, and he also has the PDFs attached down at the bottom. So if he wants to download these and print them off, he has that ability. But in this case, I'm going to view and sign these in Dotloop. So I'll go ahead and open these up in Dotloop, and we'll walk through what the client signing experience looks like. So when I first get in here, you can see we've got the contract. I can scroll through, make sure I read through everything, understand what I'm signing for. And the only reason I'm emphasizing this point, other than the obvious reason of you want to make sure your client understands what they're signing for, is that once they start signing, it's going to be a very quick process. They can go through this whole document in 20, 30 seconds if they're just signing. So you want to make sure they've read through everything first. So I'll scroll down, get down to the bottom, scroll through, get to the seller's disclosure, and you get the idea. You want to make sure they've gotten down to the very last page, read through everything. Assuming I agree with all of this, I'm ready to start signing now. So now you can see once I click start signing, it took me to the very first initial field on the first page. And the first time I go to sign one of these initial fields, it's going to give me a pop-up showing what my clients, or in this case, what my initials look like. So you can see I've got the initials over here, my full signature, and this is where Bob is confirming his signature. Now, he's got the ability to modify this if he needs to. So if he wants to add a middle initial, or if he's got some sort of title like power of attorney or trustee where he's signing on behalf of someone else, they could add that in. Or they could also draw their signature if that's what they prefer. Typically, that's if they're using an iPad or some sort of stylus or touchscreen. But once they get here, you would go ahead and click Adopt and Sign. And you'll notice that first off, it dropped me down to the next field. But the important thing to note about these signatures is that what's displayed here is not the only thing that makes this a legally binding signature. You can see that we've also stamped the time and date, and it's .lib verified, meaning that we stamp the IP address as well as the email address they're signing from. So those four pieces, the time, date, email, and IP address, are what we use to verify their signature and make it legally binding. So from here, I've already initialed once. It saves my changes so that the next time I just need to click, puts my initial in place. Now I can quickly go through the rest of these documents to get everything signed. And this is what I meant when I said it's a quick process. You can see I can go through both of these documents, 12 different initials and signatures in a matter of seconds. So now that I've gone through and signed everything, all I have to do is click Finish Signing. That'll save all my changes and then automatically share these documents back with you as the agent. So this is where Bob gets a pop-up saying these documents have automatically been shared back with Brad. And if he wants to, he can create an account, and it's a free account for him. Think of this kind of like a Dropbox account. They can sign in, access any of the documents they've signed before, anything that's been sent to them, and it's free for them to have an account, so there's really no strings attached. And I usually recommend you do have them create an account just because this is an active receipt for them. They don't necessarily have to come to you to retain a copy. But again, if they don't want to create an account, they can just close out of this. They're already done signing, and they can go back to whatever they were doing before. So that's what it looks like from the buyer's point of view. We just walked through the signing process. I know it was pretty quick, but as you can see, as long as everything's set up correctly when you send it over to them, it's a very quick process for your clients and very easy for them to use. So now we're back in my point of view as the buying agent. So let me refresh here. And you'll see that this status now changed from waiting on others to now it's signed. And both of these are signed by my client. So at this point, we are now ready to submit our offer over to the listing agent. Now, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to show you what this looks like from the listing agent's point of view, but I'll at least be able to show you leading up to the point of sharing it with them, the steps that you'll go through, and we'll talk through some of the scenarios that you'll run into and how to handle those. But first, I'm going to go ahead and check these off. And I mentioned it before, but if you do need a fax, this is where the fax feature is located. Probably don't need to use it that often. You'll probably be sharing or downloading and printing majority of the time, but we do have that option available. But at this point, I'm going to go ahead and share this. And this is where I could share this with the listing agent. So now again, this is where we're deciding what kind of permission do we want to give the listing agent. View only is if they're just going to need a copy of it. That's where I'd attach the PDF. They could download it and print it if that's what they want to do. Or what I prefer is to give them the can edit and private permission. Again, this gives them full editing capability with the documents. Ideally, what would happen is Meg would receive this. She would add her seller to the loop, or the seller would already be in there since I've linked with her loop. She would make sure the fields are assigned to her seller, send it off for signatures. The seller would accept my offer, and we'd have an accepted offer. Sounds like a dream world to have a one-time offer go through, but that is the ideal situation. But what could potentially happen is you send it to the other agent, and depending on the state that you're in, the other agent would either add a counteroffer addendum and counter your offer, or I know in some states you can counter the offer directly on the contract. The one thing to note is if the other agent does make a change to your agreement, it will reset the signatures, meaning that they're not going to be able to change the document that's signed by your buyer. It's going to create a new version of that document so that your buyer can review the document, review the counter, and decide whether or not they want to accept the counter. So with that being said, if you send it over to the other agent with can edit in private and they end up making a change, we do have a history that backs everything up. So you don't have to worry about losing your original copy. So in this case, I'll go ahead and send this over to Meg. I can use this as a PDF attachment, give her the can edit and private permission, share this over. And now you can see these are all the people who have access. The listing agent, the buyer, me, and my brokerage. We all have access to this file now. Pretty much everyone in the conference room is in the loop now. So now, again, we kind of talked about some different scenarios there. I mentioned a history that backs everything up. And that history is accessible via this drop-down menu. So I could come to the history, and this is going to show me every change, or basically every time a new version was created of these documents. So the first version was when I was filling it out. Version 2 was when I shared this over to Bob. Version 3 was when Bob signed it. And then version 4 was when I shared this over to Meg. So every time you make a change to a document or any time it passes hands and goes to a different person, a new version is created, so you always have a clean audit trail of everything that's happened within this file, and you can always go back and download a previous version. So if I wanted to see what this offer looked like before I sent it over to the listing agent, I could download it here. re-upload it into the loop and take a look at it that way. And also, one other thing to note is that any changes that are made by the other agent, when you get it back, they'll be highlighted in yellow. So it'll be obvious. One, you've got the history to show that something changed, and then two, you'll be able to open the document to see what changed exactly. So that's how you can go back and forth and to have a truly paperless transaction. Sending it over to the other agent, giving them the ability to work with the document however they need to, and you have a backup of everything to make sure that one, you stay compliant, and two, you have access to old versions. And one other piece that I want to point out as far as the history goes is we also have an activity log up here. This is a more detailed history of everything in this loop. You can see I've got everything from when I first created the loop to when I added documents, modified them, shared them. You can see when Bob viewed or signed these documents, and I'll also be able to see when the listing agent goes through and works with these documents. But this is basically a complete audit trail of everything that's happened within this loop. So now at this point, let's just assume that I submitted my offer over to Meg. She accepts my offer and she sends it back to me so that I now have an updated contract and an updated file that's been accepted. So I'm now ready to submit this to my office for review. So there's a couple things that I want to do. First off, I'm going to set this to under contract now. You'll see that we get a couple of pieces of information added here so it's more readily available. And when I submit for review, it's going to submit this whole folder. It's going to submit anything in here that says not submitted. So like, for example, if I added a document that I didn't actually need, let's just say, for example, I added this lead-based paint inspection addendum. This house was built after 1978, so I didn't need it. It just stays here as an optional document. When I submit for review, that document is not going to get submitted because there's no point in having my brokerage review a blank file. So when I submit for review, again, that's up here in the top right corner, I'm going to select the folder I'm submitting, select this as a sale, and submit. And it's going to submit the two documents I worked on, which is a document that I actually filled out or a document I'm uploading from my computer. But the one that was in here is optional, doesn't get submitted. It just stays in here as a blank PDF, and your brokerage will not be prompted to review this. So now that's pretty much the last step here. We have an accepted offer. We just submitted this to the office for review. That's when you will go through the review process, make sure you have everything in here, make sure it's all filled out correctly. Eventually, we'll start moving towards closing, get the finalized documentation for the settlement statement, any closing or inspection reports that we need to have in here. We'll get everything in this file, and then we'll essentially have a closed deal and be ready to get paid. So I know a lot of that I kind of talked through. Obviously, there's more detail when you're going through the transaction yourself, but for time's sake, I mainly just wanted to focus on the important points. So that's pretty much everything that I wanted to cover for today. Again, what we walked through is how to create a loop from the buying agent's perspective. We then walked through how to add your people, how to set up some of the different statuses and transaction types to have this more organized. We then added documents into the loop, filled them out, made one of them interactive by dragging fields onto it, shared it over to the buyer, got it signed electronically, and then submitted my offer to the listing agent, which was accepted, and then finally submitted it to the office for review. So now, I don't expect you to remember every piece of this just from this one training. What I would like to see is basically moving forward, continue to practice with this. You don't necessarily want to make your first time in the system a real transaction. A great way to practice is pair up with another agent in your office. One person's the listing agent, one person's the buying agent. Practice going back and forth with this so you know what the other person's going to see. You get some experience with using the system. And a great way to practice that is start with a file that you've already closed, upload all the documentation, just practice getting the loop in here, or create a new loop and use fake documents. Either way, the best way to learn the system is really just to get in here and use it. And then if you have questions along the way, in the bottom right-hand corner of any page in Dotloop, you'll see we have our support phone number as well as your member ID. The support team is available Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to midnight Eastern, and Saturday and Sunday, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern. So definitely take advantage of the support team. They're there to help you out, and they'll be able to help you out with any situation you're running into while using the system. And also make sure to type in your member ID. This is what tells us who you are, so we can get into your account faster and help you out. But also, if you're a premium member, this will give you a faster response time compared to a free user. So definitely take advantage of the resources that are available. We're here to help you out. And other than that, that's all I had to all I have time to cover for today. Does anybody have any questions? Anything you guys want me to cycle back through? I'm happy to help out however I can. So I have a question here asking about when a buyer signs multiple documents that are sent at one time. So I sent my full offer to the buyer. Let's say there's 7 documents in that offer. Once the buyer signs, am I going to get an email for each document they sign, or am I going to get one email for all documents? So the answer is you will get an email for each document they sign. And we've kind of gone back and forth with this functionality. Originally, it was just one email that went through, but we changed it to where you would get an email for each document. That way you could confirm that your buyer signed every single part of the package. So it just makes it a little more clear for you that everything was signed and it's all filled out correctly. So yes, you will get an email for each document they signed, and typically it'll group that email into a one email chain with 7 pieces, but you will get an email for each document that's signed. And I have gotten feedback around that. Ideally, I would like to have an option in the notification settings to select whether you want one email or an email for each document. I've gotten different responses depending on the agent as to what you prefer with the email, but I definitely appreciate the feedback. Alrighty, so any other questions or concerns, anything you guys want me to cycle back through before we wrap up the training for today? Alrighty, it doesn't look like there's any other questions at this point. Again, if you need anything else moving forward, feel free to reach out to the support team. They'll be happy to help out. Other than that, thank you everyone for attending today. Hopefully this was helpful. I appreciate your time and feel free to reach out moving forward. Otherwise, have fun looping away. And thanks again.